We had just about wrapped up you can go ahead and move on to that next slide there. We had just about finished up our church history discussion. I had a few more points to mention, and lo and behold, I didn't bring my laptop. I don't have those slides with me, and none of the material for it. So, yeah, Danielle said as we walked out the door, "Do you need your laptop?" "No, I don't need my laptop, honey." Well, she was right again. I needed my laptop. So, we were only going to talk about a few things, and we can clean that up on next Wednesday as we get the chance. What I'd noticed on the calendar, we have maybe, 5 to 6 Wednesdays available before we start our summer series. And so to get into a really in-depth and long study is something that probably wouldn't be conducive considering the time. You know, we'll have a couple of singings, we'll have a VBS, that'll take up some Wednesdays. And so we really don't have very many Wednesdays between now and July when we start our summer series. So I thought we would get into the book of Proverbs. And we're not going to do a verse-by-verse study necessarily, but what we're going to do is we're going to hit, first of all, a pretty in-depth introduction tonight. And then we're going to try to hit some Proverbs that I think we can mine some good lessons from. And of course, the book of Proverbs talks about a whole host of topics. And so I think we can get a wide and varied study from the book of Proverbs. You can go ahead and open your Bibles to the book of Proverbs. And we're going to do our best tonight to go through that first chapter, which really does serve as an introduction to the book. How many of you have studied the book of Proverbs in a Bible class? Have you done that before? Okay, you have. Good. That's good. It's a beneficial study. It's not a study in the same way as other things are, where you can have a cohesive study that goes from verse to verse, chapter to chapter, because that's not the nature of the Proverbs anyway. The nature of the Proverbs that are contained in the book of Proverbs is that they contain nuggets of wisdom, many of which are contained to just one verse. And maybe the next verse talks about a nugget of wisdom completely unrelated to that one. And so you can't have a cohesive study in the sense of a verse-by-verse study as you would in, say, the book of Colossians or something like that. And so what we're going to do is, as I said, we're going to introduce the book tonight from chapter 1, and then we're going to try to move our way through some of the more interesting parts and verses and passages of the book of Proverbs. So, as you probably know, the book of Proverbs is all about wisdom. Okay? The best working definition, and I'm sure you've all heard this, wisdom is applied knowledge. There's absolutely a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And maybe you can think back to when you were younger and there was something that you knew you shouldn't do, and yet you did it anyway. I can think of times when I would jump off of elevations that I knew I shouldn't jump off of. And if I do this, I'm liable to roll my ankle. Or I shouldn't be driving this fast down this road. And if I do this, something bad is liable to happen. You know, I knew what I needed to do and not do, but I didn't always do it. And so if you don't apply knowledge, it's useless. Wisdom is knowledge that's applied. In the book of Proverbs, one commentator described wisdom as a higher and exalted understanding containing that which is best in the sight of man and God. And certainly the wisdom in Proverbs is inspired. Now, even though it's not organized and fashioned like many of the books we're familiar with studying, the Proverbs are inspired. They are penned by Solomon. Proverbs 1 and verse 1 reminds us that these are the Proverbs from the inspired pen of Solomon. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. Solomon was the wisest man ever to have lived, who's not Jesus Christ, obviously. He got wisdom from God. God asked him me what you will, and he said, I want wisdom. He gave him wisdom, also gave him fame and power and riches. Solomon didn't always use his own wisdom. So Solomon, while he had wisdom that surpassed any of his day, he didn't necessarily make use of it himself. So as we go through the book of Proverbs, we're going to see some things that sort of remind us that maybe Solomon knows by experience the wrong thing to do and is trying to get his son, probably Rehoboam, to do better, and us. to do better than he did in some instances. So we're going to introduce the book of Proverbs from chapter 1, and really it starts with the purpose. Pick up in verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsel, to understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise, and their dark sayings. So Solomon says, here's what I'm trying to do. Who's his audience? What does he say? Anybody pick up on that? Who's his audience? In verse 4, who did he say he wants to address? The young man. Who else? The simple. What does it mean to be simple? There can be a positive connotation to that and a negative connotation to that. If someone says, I'm a simple man, that's often a good thing, right? It means they're not flashy, they don't require a lot of worldly goods and that sort of thing. But in this context, what does it mean to be simple? Hey, what does that mean? You can't use the word in the definition. He said simple-minded. Do what? Less intelligent? Okay. Sometimes intelligent people don't behave intelligently. Unlearned. And I think that's it. We use the word ignorant today to talk about people who are unintelligent. But really, ignorance isn't necessarily a lack of intelligence. What is ignorance? A lack of learning. That's right. Do what? He asked, do I want to talk about the atomic bomb? Not in particular. Yeah, I'm ignorant as well. And there are lots of areas of expertise in which I'm ignorant. And so you can say that I'm ignorant. But I'm not ignorant in the grand, across the board, I hope, and you aren't either. And so he's talking to people who are simple, who are unlearned, who are ignorant in the matters that he's addressing. And that applies to all sorts of people across the board. But in particular, he wants to talk to the young person. Why do you think he wants to focus on the young person? Well, Ecclesiastes 12, remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth. And then he goes on to say, when all of the problems that plague the old person aren't plaguing you. Okay, so certainly that's true.
They don't yet have the experience to have gained that knowledge or gained that learning.
That's true. There's a mistaken idea that wisdom only comes from experience. Is that true? Do what? For some folks, okay. And Larry, you putting yourself in that number? Yes, sir. Imagine if we only learned by experience. And I think that's Solomon's goal here. Solomon says, I want to address the young person because I don't want you to have to learn in the same way that I learned. And we hopefully can learn things to do and not to do without process of elimination in every single instance. Now, there are some people who it seems like only learn by trial and error. You can tell them, but unless they experience it themselves, they're not going to accept it. But you would hope that there are certain things in our lives that are not that way. So Solomon is talking to the ignorant and the young, and many times those categories overlap because youth is characterized by ignorance. Now, not ignorance in everything. I think we make a grave mistake if we write off young people altogether. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to do that. Well, back in my day, and therefore anybody who is not my age is not worthy of respect. As a young preacher, I experienced that. I'm trying to preach to people 3-4 times my age. Still, it's that way. And there are times when it's more difficult to accomplish things because you don't get looked at with the same amount of respect. Now, I've been preaching for a good number of years now, and it's not as pronounced as it used to be. But when I was a 24-year-old preacher, still wet behind the ears, still green right out of preaching school, it was difficult to project wisdom and understanding. And so Solomon is addressing the young and the simple. And so his target audience are those people who do not understand necessarily the things that they need to understand. Now that automatically brings us a challenge. I've got to ask myself, is he talking to me? And what's our first inclination when somebody maybe even implies that we're ignorant? What do we tend to do? Yeah, we're going to defend ourselves, right? And how many people read through the book of Proverbs and say, yeah, you tell them, and you tell them, and you tell them. Yeah, he's talking to the simple and the young. He's not talking to me. But I need to go into the book of Proverbs assuming that he's talking to me. I may very well be the ignorant one that needs to be addressed here. And there are certainly some aspects of the Christian life where I could be termed simple. There is something in Proverbs that's talking to me. Do you agree with that? There's something that's talking to you. Yes, sir.
Verse 5, he addresses the wise.
Yes, sir.
He says, what do you need to do? You've got to
You
learn
need to
the
hear.
word well.
That's right. And so, we're going to get into what characterizes wisdom from foolishness for sure. So the goal is wisdom, and his target audience is the simple and the young. What's the means? How's he going to do that? To receive, verse 3, the instruction of wisdom. You've got to be instructed in wisdom. Marion, you taught at the vocational school for years, right? And your job was to instruct people in how to do the things that you were teaching them. I'm the same way teaching English. Many of you have taught for years and years or taught in various aspects of your life. You've got to be able to communicate to other people the things that they need to accomplish what they need to do. And that's what Solomon's going to do. Listen, we don't get wiser just by sitting there. We have to take instruction. Now, sometimes that instruction comes from our experiences. But if we don't learn from those experiences, are we any wiser? No. We've got to take instruction in order to be wise. And so it happens through instruction. So what are the tools? He says in verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Perception. The ability to pick up on what's being said and to process it and to understand it. But number 2, we've got to have open ears. You mentioned verse 5, Arliss. A wise man will hear and will increase learning. You can't teach somebody who doesn't want to be taught. Why can you not teach an old dog new tricks? Because they don't want to be taught. If we don't want to be taught, we cannot be instructed, therefore we can't get wiser. So it happens through instruction. We need perception and we need open ears in order for it to work. Notice these infinitives, to know, verse 2, to receive, to perceive, verses 2 and 3, to give, and to understand, verse 6. So these are things that we've got to do. It's on me to understand, to perceive, to pick up on those things that I need to do. So there's the purpose. He's trying to give wisdom to the people who need it. That seems pretty simple. Now what do you need in order to receive it? Look at verse 7. Some have said this is the thesis of the book of Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother, for they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. So he says, if you really want to be wise, what's the very first thing you need? Fear of the Lord. What does it mean to fear the Lord?
Respect.
Okay, healthy respect for God. I need to respect God. You won't learn from people you don't respect. Will you? You ever been in a class where the teacher lost the students' respect? I was in a class in 7th grade, and I'm not proud of this. It was a geometry class, maybe, or a math class or something. It wasn't geometry. Danielle says, they didn't teach you geometry in 7th grade. You don't know. You weren't there. She probably does know. But some of the kids in the class had it as their goal every day to get that teacher to cry. And they would push her to the limit, and she would storm out of class, and we wouldn't have class. And that was the goal of every student just about, was to not have to have class. And essentially that teacher lost the respect of her students because they knew that they could push her over the limit, and so they figured out how to do it, and they would do it. And kids can be merciless and cruel and mean if you let them do that. And that's exactly what happened. If you don't respect the source of knowledge and wisdom, you're never going to gain anything. And I think part of the issue with us when we're young is that we have issues respecting those who are trying to teach us. And that's one reason sometimes why our ears are closed when we're young, because we lack that respect. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. By the way, what was Solomon's conclusion in the book of Ecclesiastes? Fear God and keep His commandments. So this is the whole of man. That's the beginning and the end, right? The beginning of knowledge is to fear God. The conclusion of the whole matter is fear God. Solomon began at the same place that he ended up. What he did in the middle didn't match. But the beginning and the end are the same. And so we need to fear the Lord. But here's the question, and this is what Solomon places before his son and his audience. You must determine, and I must determine what we want. Verse 8. My son, hear the instruction of thy father, forsake not the law of thy mother. They shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, chains about thy neck. He says, look, if you follow wisdom, you will be successful. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. He says that in verse 7. So I've got to choose right now, do I want to be a wise person or do I want to be a fool? Does anybody ever choose actively to be a fool? I mean, do they say, I want to be a fool?
I think they choose to be, whether it's intentional or not.
You've known people who intentionally chose to be a fool? They said, I want to do the wrong thing because I know it'll mess my life up?
One of the guys I used to work with, his nickname was the Village Idiot. He
All right.
wore it proudly, and when he would do something, he would do it like an idiot and come in and brag about it.
Wow. Well, the book of Proverbs will have something to say to a fellow like that, for sure. But most of us, if you give us a choice, right? Wisdom or foolishness, most of us will say, I want wisdom. But as Ken said, what we claim to want and what we actually choose might be two different things. So the point I'm making is, it's our choice to be fools or to be wise. We have that choice. You know, today we so often try to push the blame down the road to someone else for the choices and the decisions that we make. But I choose to be a fool and I choose to be wise. It's my choice. And so Solomon says, my son, hear the words of your father. Don't forsake the law of your mother. If you do that, you'll be successful, but it's your choice. And that's the same thing every time we open up the Word of God, every time we're placed with a decision before us, we have the choice. It's up to us what we're going to do. So, I've got to ask myself, what do I want? Do I want to be a fool or do I want to be wise? Do I want foolishness and failure or do I want success? And so number one then we see the purpose. Number two, the preparation. Number three, let's put this into practice. And this is where it really gets interesting. Look at verse 10. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. The problem that Solomon sees is the temptation of the world and the pull and the enticement that sin and foolishness will have towards his son. Now this is really interesting if you consider he's talking to Rehoboam. What happened in the life of Rehoboam? Early on in his kingship, what happened?
Listen to the foolish young men and made the burdens hard.
Okay. He was given a choice. Solomon's passed on. Rehoboam has the United Kingdom, and he has a choice. I can either relieve the burdens of my people, demonstrate that I'm a graceful, merciful king, and win their hearts, or I can show them how tough I am, and I can make their burdens harder, and I can force fear into them, and then they'll serve me out of fear. And he says, which should I do? Which is the wisest course of action? And so he went to his father's advisors, the old men in the government, and they said, make their burdens lighter. Be merciful, show them your mercy and your compassion, and they will follow you and serve you. But he went to his young friends, and what did they say? Hey, you're a young king with no experience. You better come in guns a-blazing. And you better let them know who's boss. You make their burdens heavier. And of course, who did he listen to? He listened to the young men. So, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. But Rehoboam is going to, unfortunately, be swayed by the decisions of those around him. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. Don't do it. Now that's easier, unfortunately, said than done, isn't it? Wouldn't it be so easy if every time you're tempted, just don't do it? If you've ever had a discussion with someone who's an addict, who's addicted to a substance or a behavior, and you say, just don't do it. Well, it is that simple, but it's not that simple at the same time. It is and it isn't. Yes, certainly, I have to make different choices, but the pull and the tug of those temptations is very strong. And so you see, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. Verse 11, if they say, here's what they say, look at their selling point. If they say, come with us, let us lay wait for blood, let us lurk privately for the innocent without cause, let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. Do they hide their intentions? Here they don't. Now sometimes they package it really well and they do hide their intentions. But there's sometimes when temptation just says, hey, come and sin with me. And here's what we're going to do. And all of the bad things we're going to do. And that's what we see here in Proverbs chapter 1. They don't try to hide what they're doing. Come and let us lay wait for blood. Let us lurk privately for the innocent without a cause. Let's go take advantage of lots of people. Let's go do lots of horrible things.
Talk to anyone that says, I know it's wrong, I know I'll lose my soul, but it's worth it.
It's worth it. I've not been told in that many words. I've had people who, with their actions indicated that they were going to continue to do something they knew that was wrong. But if someone actually says it's worth it to do these things and lose my soul, they obviously don't know the value of their soul. They really, really don't. But what you see here, they're not hiding anything. But notice what they promise in verse 13. We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. You see, that's the selling point, isn't it? Look at all you'll gain. Yeah, I know it's wrong, but look at what you'll gain. And for people who get obsessed with what they can have and what they can get and the power that they can have over others, it really is about the end justifying the means. If I can get more from it, then it doesn't matter how I do it. If I can be more successful, it doesn't matter how I do it. It's difficult sometimes to reason with students. A student wants an A. They didn't do their homework. So what are they going to do? They're going to cheat. Why? Because they want an A. Because of the result. They know it's wrong. They know the potential consequences if they get caught. But they're worried about the result. They're worried about the payday that they will get as a result of it. That's all they're worried about. If we get too obsessed and too desirous of the end result, that we forget about the process and we forget about the benefits, that's when it can really affect us. Well, you say only young people do that. Don't adults do the same things with taxes? Right? I'm going to defraud the government because I can get more money at the end of it for me. Oh, they got plenty anyway. We justify it, right? The same way, look, what did the sinners say? We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. We'll gain from this. Yes, it's wrong, but we'll gain from it. And think about how many decisions people make in their lives, otherwise good people, and they do things they know are wrong because they know they can gain from it. And that's what's being sold here in Proverbs 1. But here is the kicker. Verse 14. Cast in thy lot among us, let us all have one purse. What are they saying? We can do it together. We can be buddies. Think about the prodigal son. What did he go and do? Okay. He went and joined himself with all of those wicked people in the world, and he wasted his substance on riotous living. And when he hit rock bottom, who was there? Not a single soul. The pigs were the only ones there. Not a single soul was there. But what did sin promise? Hey, come with us. We'll be together. We'll be unified. We can share our purse together. We'll keep all the spoils and we'll divide them equally between us. But as the saying goes, there is no honor among thieves. And that's true about sin as well. At the end of the day, when sin destroys, it's every person for themselves, isn't it? It absolutely is. And how many people have taken a certain path because of the group that's leading them down that path, and then when they hit the bottom, the group is gone. So that's a fraudulent claim. Cast in thy lot among us, let us all have one purse. We'll be happy, we'll do it all together. But that is unfortunately not how it ends up. And here's what Solomon has to say about that. Here's the moral of the story, verse 15 and following. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. I had an elder in the church and a longtime principal, and he said, the most important factor in a person's faithfulness is who they choose to surround themselves with. Doesn't that scare you, parents? You, parents, we parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, whatever, we are not the most important influence in our child's life. The three young people that were baptized recently, you can ask them. I've told every young person I've ever baptized this. This is the first and most important decision you'll ever make. And the second one is what? Who you choose to marry. Now it's a little odd telling that to a 9-year-old. But that's when they need to hear it. That's when they need to start hearing it, right? In my opinion, they need to start hearing right now. The second most important decision is who you choose to marry. File that away. As important as this decision is, the next one will be who you choose to marry. Well, we marry the people that we surround ourselves with eventually, right? So let's surround ourselves with good people. Yeah, that's a 99.99% truth, right? We always marry someone that we've dated. Very rarely do you just see somebody across the way at Walmart and say, let's go to the courthouse. You know, it doesn't usually work that way. If it worked that way for you, I'm proud for you. But most people don't. It doesn't work that way. So my son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. Don't follow these people. Because the end result is going to be disaster. It's going to be destruction. And here's what he says about it, verse 16. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. They live for sin. They run towards it. Isn't there a difference between stumbling into sin and running towards it? Those who run towards sin are the most dangerous kind. It's one thing to just mess up and stumble into it, but to purposefully seek it out quickly. And if we surround ourselves with those people, the trouble that we'll find is just unfathomable. Now here is really where it gets interesting. Verse 17, surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. All these nets that they're casting out to try to catch all this prey, something bad is going to end up happening. Verse 18, they lay wait for their own blood, and they lurk privately for their own lives. What happens? All those snares, who do they catch? They catch themselves. Who ultimately gets hurt by these things? The people who are doing them. Now, unfortunately, there's collateral damage too. But if I make a decision, ultimately, if it's one that leads me down this path, ultimately I will be affected by that. And I will be caught in my own snare. And that is truly a heartbreaking scenario. Verse 19, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, which takes away the life of the owners thereof. Everybody who follows this path inevitably is going to end up there. And that's what Solomon says. And that's a truth that he tries to communicate to his son. So there is the practical application of what he's been talking about. Any comments or questions before we move on? All right. So now wisdom is going to speak up. Wisdom personified. And what we've got in the book of Proverbs is essentially a battle between wisdom and folly. And both of them are going to be personified. Wisdom is going to cry out here in just a moment. And in a few chapters, we'll see folly calling and enticing the young man to come her way. Okay? But I want you to notice the qualities of wisdom in chapter 1 as we look at verse 20. How is she making this call? Wisdom cries from outside. Wisdom crieth without. So is wisdom whispering her truth? Her knowledge, her instruction? Hey, you need to do right. No. Wisdom is crying it. The word means to scream or shout for joy. Wisdom's got something really amazing to share with you, and she is screaming it at the top of her lungs. Where is she screaming it? Let's keep reading. Wisdom cries without. She utters her voice in the streets. I think of, we were just in Atlanta. You know, and it wasn't this way in Atlanta because of COVID, but oftentimes you go to a big city and you see the people with the signs, you know, they're holding up the signs. If you ever go to a big-time college football game, for instance, you go to Knoxville when there's not COVID or something limiting the crowds. And I know, Connie, you just love going to Knoxville. But if you go to Knoxville, I remember the last time I went, it was just this huge throng of people. And there was this group in the middle with the sign, you know, and they were trying to promote some sort of idea or something like that. That's how I picture wisdom. Wisdom has a bullhorn in one hand and a picket sign in the other. They're walking up and down the street, not making a secret at all about what she's trying to teach. Laying it out there for everybody to see and for everybody to hear. And notice the places that she chooses, in particular, verse 21. She cries in the chief places of concourse. What would that equate to today? Where would you go? Do what? The malls. Well, you can say that. I don't know about this mall. You been in ours lately? But yes. You would go to, well, actually today you'd probably go to Walmart. That's where you'd go. You'd go up and down the aisles at Walmart.
Washington, D.C.
Well, yeah, that'd be the place to go if you could find anybody to listen. Certainly, you would go to the places where the business is being done, which brings us to the next part in verse 22 or verse 21. In the openings of the gates. What happened in the gates of the cities? That's where they did business transactions. A visitor from another city, they'd meet there at the gate. And they would undertake their business. People from within the city would come to the gate. They'd undertake their business. That was the place where business got done. That was the downtown courthouse of those days. And so look, she's going to the places that are the most populated and the highest trafficked. And she's going to the places where business is being done. So she's going to the places where people are. And she's screaming at the top of her lungs. This isn't a secret. If you want to know what God expects of you, can you know it? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not a secret. Verse 22, here's her message. How long, ye simple ones, will you love simplicity, and the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge? Turn ye at my reproof. Behold, I'll pour out my spirit unto you. I'll make known my words unto you. You see, wisdom has a promise too, just like those sinners. Wisdom says, I'll bless you. If you follow me, then I'll bless you. She's plain about what's going to happen if you follow her. She makes no bones about it. But do most people listen to that wisdom? And as we look at verses 24 and following, she makes a pronouncement upon those who will not follow her. Because I have called, and you refused. I've stretched out my hand, and no man regarded. But you've set at naught all my counsel, and would none of my reproof. So notice there are 4 things that they have done. They've refused, they've not regarded, they've set at naught, and they would none of. They just refuse to listen. It's not that they can't hear her. It's not that she's not clear enough. It's not whatever excuse you want to put in there. At the end of the day, why do people not follow wisdom? They don't want to. They don't agree with it. They don't want to. It doesn't match what they desire. They just don't want to. Now notice, wisdom says something really interesting in verse 26. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. Is that God talking? Who's saying this? Wisdom personified is saying this. I don't know that God laughs at our calamity. In fact, what does God do in the time of our trouble? He grieves, and He's a very present help in distress, right? God is our protector and our shield. Okay, so don't get mistaken that God is rooting for people to be lost, but wisdom personified is laughing. Why? Well, she tells us. I also will laugh at your calamity. I'll mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation, your destruction cometh as a whirlwind. When distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call upon me, but I'll not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. Why is she laughing? Because she knows how it works, doesn't she? You're going to come back to me when it all goes south. And when you watch the behavior of some people, if it weren't so sad, wouldn't it almost be funny? And wisdom says, I can't believe it. I know exactly how this is going to go. I can write the story before it even begins. And wisdom just says, you're going to come back to me, but then it might very well be too late. That's wisdom's message here. If you go too far down this path, you might find out you can't come back. Verse 29, for that they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Remember, that's the beginning of knowledge. They would none of my counsel. They despised all of my reproof. Now here's verse 31, and this is the sad part. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their own way and be filled with their own devices. Can wisdom just swoop in and fix all their problems after they've had them? No. These foolish people make their beds, and wisdom is powerless to keep them from laying in them. And that's what wisdom says. I'm calling for you, and you won't heed. And if you continue down this path, you'll find yourself in a situation where now you want me, but I'm not there. Yes?
Judas threw silver that day.
Exactly. He should have heeded the wisdom before. Now, he could still have heeded it then. I'm certainly not saying that things are hopeless when we make bad decisions. But sometimes we become so disoriented and calloused that we will not come back. And I think that's what you see happening with the folly, the foolish person here. So he says, for the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. But whoso hearkeneth unto me shall dwell safely, and shall be quiet from fear of evil. So there's that comparison between those who are faithful to wisdom's teachings and those who are not. So there's chapter 1, and that really sets the stage for everything that the book of Proverbs is going to talk about. There's going to be lots of practical instruction in the book of Proverbs. What questions or comments do you have?
If you find
That's certainly true. Just because we fix the problem doesn't mean the consequences go away. That's certainly true. How many people have gotten wrapped up in substance abuse and cleaned themselves up, but still suffer the physical, effects of those years of substance abuse? It's not something that we can just, click our fingers and it goes away. Sometimes the wisdom that they didn't heed laughs at them in those moments, doesn't it? It absolutely does. Any other comments or questions?
Well, back to the fear of the Lord that we talked about there several minutes ago, being the beginning of knowledge. When we look around, we see no absolute moral values being taught anywhere in the fabric of our nation, other than very limited in the church. And thus, these folks, without that moral basis, there's nothing for them to build upon to not become that fool that is talked about there.
That's right. The fear of the Lord is the foundation of everything else. A respect for God, a respect for His Word, and the saving grace in all of this, I talked about parents and how we are not always the most important or the most influential voice in our kids' lives. The saving grace in all of that is that we do lay the foundation, don't we? And we hope that even if they get on the wrong track, the fear of the Lord as a foundation brings them back. That's the hope. That's what we can do, is lay that foundation, guide our kids in the right way, and hope that that foundation is strong enough to see them through the temptations that the world hands them. Any other comments or questions? All right, appreciate it, y'all.